The global war on terrorism all started on a catastrophic day in American history, 9/11. The date September 11th, 2001 will never be forgotten in the minds of every person in America and for the rest of history. The only explanation for this attack was pure hatred and evil towards American culture. A few days after the attack, George W. Bush, the president at the time, declared the war on terror. He stated in front of Congress,
"The enemy of America is not our many Muslim friends. It is not our many Arab friends. Our enemy is a radical network of terrorists and every government that supports them. Our war on terror begins with Al-Qaeda, but it does not end there. It will not end until every terrorist group of global reach has been found, stopped, and defeated."
On October 7th, 2001, after the 9/11 attacks, the U.S. and its allies launched a military campaign in Afghanistan to remove the Taliban from power and to destroy al-Qaeda's camps. Al-Qaeda and its leader, Osama bin Laden, were responsible for the attacks of September 11th. By December 2001, the United States had removed the Taliban from power, and all major attacks had been ended. The Bush administration created detention centers at the U.S. naval base in Cuba. There, the U.S. moved all terror suspects that they captured in wartime to this detention center. The war on terror was not considered a traditional war. The war could not use conventional military tactics used in previous wars, as the specific location of the enemy was unknown. The terrorists operated in secret and often hid underneath in caves, and some were hidden by government regimes. Therefore, the military had to approach this war differently and make primitive strikes, hoping they'd cause harm to the terrorists without hurting innocent people. Sometimes this worked, and sometimes the approach hurt innocent people, which created more controversy over the war. America would use unmanned drones to fire on suspected terrorists in the remote areas of the Middle East. The Army would also go out and man tanks to hunt down terrorists. Ports were also monitored to ensure flow of oil continued without disruption. America really was the key country fighting this war since we were attacked. We were fighting a war in the part of the world where many countries did not align with our beliefs and values, and it was a strain on some of our diplomatic relations. During the war on terror, my uncle Jason Wallace was stationed with the Coast Guard. He had joined the military after college because he grew up in a family where there was a focus on serving the community. He really wanted to find a career where he felt he was helping others in our country. My uncle chose this arm of the military because that branch had multiple responsibilities: helping people or ships out at sea, securing ports of entry, or stopping entries of illegal drugs into the country. Even before 9/11, the Coast Guard was trained to fight the war, especially the war on drugs.
Remember that day. I was assigned to the cutter, and the Resolute was in port. We were in St. Petersburg, tied to the dock, and we were doing maintenance on the ship, doing all the things that we normally do, the training and upkeep, while we were getting ready for our next deployment. And it's in the daily routine of the ship when we were in, at about 10 o'clock, there would be a coffee break for the crew. It's just sort of a nautical tradition. So we'd get about a half hour, 15-minute to a half hour break where everyone would go down to the mess deck, which is like the cafeteria. And there'd be coffee, and sometimes there'd be bagels or donuts or something. Mm-hmm. And there's a big TV on the wall there. And I remember when I finally came down a few minutes after the coffee break had started, everyone was just staring at the TV and not even talking. And so I didn't realize it, but I got my coffee and I look up, and what I see is the first plane had already struck one of the towers, and the news was going crazy. Every channel was about the news, about what was happening and trying to understand it. And while we were watching the news, we actually watched the second plane strike the second World Trade Center tower. So that's how we knew. That was, there was no notification. We knew as the same time everybody else did. That afternoon, obviously everyone's watching the news and not a whole lot of work got done. But that afternoon, the ship's captain and the other captains that were in the port there all agreed that we would already put ourselves on high alert. Called a tactical law enforcement team, which is kind of like a SWAT team if you want to compare it to like a civilian police force. Now, while I was assigned to that unit, they deployed us to the Middle East. I actually did 2 deployments over there into the Iraq, Iran, Saudi Arabia area. And one of the things that they had us doing in support of those operations there was doing takedowns of suspected terrorist vessels, because that's something that it's difficult for many people to understand if you've never worked in that environment. But not everybody who's a military combatant, an enemy or a good guy, wears a uniform and shows up the way you think they do, right? They may not be in a vehicle that's painted up that says, I'm a soldier for this country. Many times, and this is something that was very common with the war on terrorism, is it wasn't about fighting a particular country, right? We weren't fighting Iraq's army or Saudi Arabia's army. We were fighting groups of people that had banded together based on an ideology. So many of them dressed and appeared to be normal fishermen, right? And they would have their fishing boats loaded up with bombs to try to damage or destroy U.S. and allied assets. So my team was one of the teams that did routine inspections and boardings on these types of vessels to determine if they were good guys or bad guys. And we found several bad guys. My team in particular was also sent on several patrols where they would drop us off on land near the water, right? Mostly up and down the river that you would take from the northern Arabian Gulf up to the port of Qasr, which is where the big Allied base was. Well, we would sometimes patrol that riverbank looking for evidence of terrorist activity, because there were areas that they could use to ambush, it's like supply boats and ships coming up. And we would find stashes of weapons, we would find hideouts. We actually captured a few prisoners. We worked with Navy SEALs. We worked with the Navy EOD, which is the Explosive Ordnance Disposal Unit, to get minefields and other bombs and ordnance safely disposed of so that it would not harm any of our allies. I think there are many lessons we can learn from this war. And I think first is to remember how long we've been fighting this war. A very long time, basically your whole life.
Yeah.
Which is kind of ridiculous if you think about it. I think it's important that as a country as powerful as the United States is, you know, and when I say powerful, I don't necessarily mean by military strength. I mean by political strength as well, right? Much of the world looks up to us, whether it's because they respect us or because they fear us. That's a different question. But for us to be here now doesn't seem right to me, right? If we are going to engage in an armed conflict with another group, whether that's another country or as in this case, it's not a country, but a group of people, I think it's very important that we define why we're engaging in conflict and what we're trying to accomplish with that. And we need to define that very early. And I don't know that we did that, right? Because how do we know if we won?
Yeah.
You know, we're still technically fighting, right? Maybe the areas on the globe have changed a little bit, but it's still the same war.
Although, just like what my uncle said, the war on terror will never be over, we can learn many lessons from what has happened through a decade of fighting.